Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 157 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new Netflix original series Sense8, about a group of 8 strangers from around the world who find themselves becoming part of a telepathic group mind. And this will involve spoilers for Season 1 of Sense8, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got our producer, John Joseph Adams. He's the editor of Lightspeed and Nightmare magazines, and also the series editor of Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. He's also edited many other anthologies, including the recent books Wastelands 2, Operation Arcana, and The End Has Come. So John, welcome back.
Good to be here.
And also joining us today is Tobias Buckell, making his 8th appearance on the show. He's the author of the Xenowealth series of space adventure novels, the eco-thrillers Arctic Rising and Hurricane Fever, and the New York Times bestselling Halo novel The Cold Protocol. So Toby, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
And also joining us for the first time is Sam J. Miller. He's a writer and a community organizer in New York City, and his short fiction appears in magazines such as Lightspeed, Nightmare, and Strange Horizons, and has been nominated for the Nebula and Theodore Sturgeon Awards, and has won the Shirley Jackson Award. So Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and so this show, Sense8, was created by the Wachowskis, who did the Matrix movies, and by J. Michael Straczynski, who made Babylon 5. And a few weeks ago, John emailed me and said I had to watch it, that it was terrific. And that surprised me a little bit that he would say that, given his track record with the Wachowskis. So just to give you an example of that, back in episode 138, John says, quote, "I've never liked any of their movies. Please take away their directing cards. Stop giving them more ammunition to let these people make movies they shouldn't be allowed to. They're taking millions of dollars that could be applied to actually good science fiction movies, and they're making these overblown spectacles that I find repellent." So I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what John's expectations were regarding the Wachowskis going into this show. But John, how about J. Michael Straczynski? Did you have any particular expectations regarding his involvement?
Yeah, I was actually basically kind of neutral about him. Like I knew he was very well regarded for Babylon 5. I never got into it myself. And I haven't read any of his comics work or anything. So basically it's like, I didn't have any high expectations, certainly because I was never a fan, but I didn't really have any bad expectations. I just figured he was the sort of person, well, it's like, I understand a lot of people like him. I haven't personally connected with anything he's done yet, but I didn't, just assume that he would turn in terrible things.
And how about Toby? What sort of expectations did you have going into this, given the involvement of the Wachowskis and J. Michael Straczynski?
I liked Babylon 5 when I was in high school, and I have not revisited it since then. So I kind of also, like John, was neutral on J. Michael's involvement, because I've not gone back and double-checked my own sort of high school love of the series. I'm usually suspect of things I still remember liking in high school at this age. But I really like The Matrix, and I think the Wachowskis do some interesting visual things, but I think that sometimes I am left cold by their ability to world build and to do dialogue and a number of other items. And so I kind of went into this not quite neutral, but with, hopes that maybe there'd be something interesting visually, a sort of interesting visual spectacular, and ended up watching a very heavy character-based piece of science fiction. So I was quite surprised and pleased.
And how about Sam? What did you think of the Wachowskis and J. Michael Straczynski going into this?
I don't know anything about J. Michael Straczynski, but I feel like with the Wachowskis, I've always felt, including The Matrix, that they make really well-made movies that I just don't connect with emotionally for whatever reason. And with the exception of Cloud Atlas, which I actually loved and thought was a really brilliant movie, although there were things about it I didn't love, like the fact that Asian characters were being played by white people. But the reason that I think one of the things that I loved about Cloud Atlas was it wasn't just them. They co-directed that with Tom Tykwer, and the result is something I felt really different from the rest of their work. And he was also associated with Sense8, so I thought that would be a good sign for their like talent to be tempered with something more emotionally real, which I actually think is what happened.
That's interesting. You know, I heard really mixed things about both Speed Racer and Cloud Atlas, so I never saw them. But having watched this, I maybe would be curious to go
Hmm.
back and watch Cloud Atlas. Did anyone else see it? Anyone else have an opinion on it?
I have not seen Cloud Atlas or Speed Racer.
I saw Cloud Atlas, and so obviously what my opinion on their work has been prior to that. I haven't seen Speed Racer. I have to say, actually, seeing Sense8 and liking it so much, I actually kind of want to see Speed Racer, just because I have actually heard people say that it's really good. I think Robert Kirkman actually says it's really good, and he was ranting about how great it was. And so it's so there certainly are people who stick up for it and say that it's actually a good movie. I never had any interest in it because I don't care about the cartoon. It didn't look like it was particularly interesting, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's the one movie of theirs unrelated to the Matrix that I haven't seen. I never saw the third Matrix movie because I hated the second one so much. But yeah. I mean, I almost kind of want to see Jupiter Ascending now. I mean, I don't know if I'd go that far, but but I mean, really, I really like Sense8 so much. So yeah, I mean, I kind of feel weird about it, but
Well, John, talk a little bit more about that, because I mean, this does seem in many ways a characteristic Wachowski's project, right?
Mhm.
I mean, do you see it? What makes this so much different in your mind from The Matrix or Cloud Atlas or whatever?
Well, what I think is interesting is so Sam was talking about how their movies are well made, but they don't resonate with him emotionally. And I mean, I think that's been true for me as well. But then Sense8 really does the emotional stuff really, really well. I mean, seriously, I got very caught up in a lot of the different emotional scenes in the show, and watching it with my wife and stuff, and it's we're both just sort of on the verge of tears at multiple times, and so I actually watched all 12 episodes, and then I told you how great it was, and I said we should do a panel, and then leading up to the panel, we actually rewatched the whole show again already. So I mean, so that sort of says how much I liked it, and then even on rewatch, I was finding myself getting just really, really emotionally invested in all of the different events, and I mean, I think the reason that works so well on the show is that the characters are just so well drawn. These characters feel like real people, and that's not a case that I probably wouldn't say that for most of the Wachowskis' work prior to that. And I don't know who's responsible for it. I don't know if it's J. Michael Straczynski or whatever. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. It all came together in a way that really worked for me. I mean, I have some concerns about the show's sort of long-term viability, but I mean, what we've seen so far, I mean, I'm just all in. I love it.
I mean, Sam, what do you think about that? About the characters? Do you agree with John that the characters are well drawn?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's really what hooked me. I feel like this show gives astonishing degree of time and support and resources to nurturing character development and relationships. I've heard people critique it on those grounds and say it's not action packed enough. It moves very slowly. This show spends whole episodes devoted to things that other shows would at most give a scene for. And I think that's so important and so central to its real strength, which is to show the importance of community and chosen family and the ways in which our lives are interwoven. So it isn't just the characters that work for me so well; it's also the relationships between them. So that was something that worked really well for me.
Right. Were there any particular characters did you like all the characters about equally, or did you have ones that were your favorites or ones you weren't as much into?
I really liked Van Damme the most for most of the show. And I liked Sun a lot. And, it was funny. I actually disliked Leto, the gay closeted actor, a lot and had a lot of problems with that storyline. But it ended up being one of the real strengths of the show and something that I really loved. And I think they did really interesting things with the way characters' story and the way they were told changed over time. Because that starts off being a sort of telenovela that ends up being, I thought, got at some pretty real emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, Sam. So you thought just it was a little bit campy or something initially?
It was played a little bit too much for laughs. It was a little too. I find there's often Modern Family is sort of the example of this that gets me the most of the gay couple that's cute comic relief. And so I felt like this was kind of that. And so that ended up sort of really subverting that trope in a really radical way that I really loved.
There's this thing about the show that fascinates me because when I started watching it, I was really worried about both Van Damme's son and Lita's storylines because they actually started from a place of almost stereotypical characters that you see quite a bit, right? The smoldering Latin lover from a telenovela. Those are like, if you ask people in the US what they know about sort of South America telenovelas and that are basically really quickly accessible stereotypes. Son is also a martial arts practicing South Korean lady with a sort of inscrutable father who does the honorable thing. And Van Damme is almost a sort of magical Negro stereotype where he's wise, he's happy, he lives in an Africa where there's AIDS and warlords. And as the show keeps going, they start subverting a lot of these things. So I spent the first half of the series kind of really worried about where they would go. But by the dint of really digging into the characters' depths, they managed to sort of explore some of the things that I was worried about. For example, at one point, one of the characters does say, "Are you in Africa?" And he says, "No, no, 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 no." Right? He actually corrects them. He's like, "Africa's a continent. I'm living in a country." And he can name it. And I think was it Kenya?
Yeah, Kenya, yeah.
I'm blanking. Yeah, I've spent
Kenya.
all day. Yeah, so he actually corrects them, which is this huge thing that we're always talking about online about that, people who just go like, Africa is this one thing. I'm still worried in that I want to see more specificity in that his environment is still sort of a little bit generic, quote unquote, stereotypical Africa in some ways. But because they keep digging and digging, Sun eventually goes through this really fascinating kind of sequence that you kind of go like, art is flawed and I'm willing to give them this just to see where they're going to take it. If this all falls apart in season 2, I'm going to be distraught and people are going to be, throwing eggs at me in the street or something like that. But I kind of, started out going like, oh my gosh, why is this guy smiling all the time? Why does he always have something wise to tell everyone? And they really just kind of power through all the way to the other side with that character and all the characters that they're kind of using these stereotypical moments of to sort of explore this depth, the iceberg underneath them that kind of goes, by the time you're done, you kind of go like, okay, I see where they're going with this, and I'm willing to grant them this just to see them, keep making the characters whole and human and complete.
What I find really interesting about how well the characters are drawn is that I feel like I could watch a whole show about almost all of them. Like I don't know that Will has a sufficiently interesting enough storyline to sustain a show by himself. I don't know if Wolfgang does, but I think most of the other ones do. Like I would watch a show about Leto, about Capheus, about Kala, about Sun, and about Nobi. Yeah, and let's see, Riley maybe. Yeah, I mean it's harder to say with her, but I mean, just the fact that there's so many rich storylines there that I would love to see more of really gives me a lot of hope that the show's gonna be able to take some time to explore some of these things. And I was gonna say with when Sam was talking about Leto's storyline being sort of played for laughs, like I did noticed that myself, that like his storyline was sort of more the lighthearted one, and I have to say, like, one of my favorite lines from the show is actually in one of the scenes where it's like, okay, well, it's obviously being played for laughs, but like he's sort of having his meltdown in traffic, and it's like related to the Sense8 thing because he's sort of channeling someone else's emotions, but he's having his little meltdown in traffic, and somebody cuts him off and he says, "I see you, villain," and I'm like, that's such a hilarious line. Like I just love that. Like it was a hilarious thing to say.
And I did think the Hernando character, his boyfriend, I thought he felt to me like the most real character.
Yeah.
He felt like the most like a real person of any of the characters in the show. I was going to say, though, my least favorite out of the Sense8s was actually Kala. I thought she was sort of boring. I thought in workshop, writing workshop terms, I thought she was what we would call a passive character, where she never really did anything. She was just kind of always standing around witnessing things that were going on around her. I don't know if anyone felt that way as well.
Yeah, that's probably true. She is one of the more passive characters. She's so like like I found her so interesting though, and like she was and like the actress was just like really adorable, and like I like enjoyed watching her perform like her scenes. I mean, the thing is, I think like they are positioning her to have to make some big important decisions, and it's just that we haven't seen that much of it. We haven't seen her have to do that at this point yet, too much. Like, you know, obviously she has a big decision to make whether or not to marry Rajan and all that kind of thing. So I think maybe some of that's going to be saved for season 2. But yeah, I mean, that's a fair enough complaint.
And then the character I thought was the most interesting actually was Nomi, who I don't think we've mentioned yet. Did anyone have any feelings about her as a character?
I did, and part of it was that I personally find very triggering scenes of like medicalized / restrained queer people and women, and found those scenes really difficult. The early scenes of her being like institutionalized and forcibly restrained and medicated against her will. And I couldn't tell how much of that was just that's personally triggering for me, and how much of it is it being exploitative and manipulative. I'm not sure if anyone else had any thoughts on that. But her character ended up being amazing, and the casting of a trans woman playing such a great role was really was exciting, and she was marvelous.
I mean, I felt that since Lana Wachowski is a trans woman herself, I really felt that she had channeled a lot of herself into that character, and I felt that I could feel the investment of the creator in that character. I thought.
I read an interview where she said that was actually very personal and difficult for her to write that character.
What I really like about the you guys mentioned it earlier, I forget who, but someone said the theme of found family that runs throughout it all, and I think that is extremely warm with those two characters, that sense of found family, creating a family outside of a biological family, among friends and community and with each other, and the tremendous devotion between the two characters. It's one of the more loving relationships I've ever seen, like on screen. You know, in on-screen fiction, we see so many stories about people falling in love, but never like these rock steady partnerships of people who are already in love and who work together as a team against the rest of the world so strongly. And seeing that, I think, depicted in any way was just amazing. And to have it with those two characters, I really responded to their storyline. They were two of my favorite characters in the show.
I almost kind of wish that there was a version of the show that didn't have all the explicit sex in it. Like I think it works really well on the show, but like I also feel like my 13-year-old stepdaughter would really like the show if it didn't have all this like really explicit sex in it. And it's like the stuff in the show, like it's all really well done, and it's like you know, it's very, very character oriented. It is not like, you know, not like super titillating, but it's like it's so intense. Like I would actually be uncomfortable watching it with anybody but my wife. Like, I mean, if I wouldn't want to have like friends over to watch this show probably, because it's like it's pretty hot stuff, you know. It's like I don't want to watch that with my friends, like, you know. And so certainly my you know, my stepdaughter wouldn't watch it with us, and I don't even think that she'd want to watch it on her own because it's so you know, so explicit. But yeah, so I don't know. I kind of wonder if it's going to get syndicated onto cable at some point, where, you know, they'll sort of sanitize some of it a little bit to make it, you know, PG-13 or something. On the other hand, I actually really respect them for going for that and not sort of pre-sanitizing it, since, you know, Netflix doesn't have any kind of, you know, ratings boundaries to worry about. So, you know, I talked about this in the Mad Max panel where I was saying, you know, it's like I really like that, they just went forward and made a rated R movie without trying to pander to the PG-13 audience. So, you know, same deal here.
Well, and it's interesting, John, because I mean, there are a lot of shows that deal with explicit sex, dealing with the fantasy of sex, but not so much the reality of sex and gender. And I thought this show was really striking in the way that it dealt with the reality of bodies and gender. And you know, like the scene where Amanita fakes a bloody tampon. Like, you don't see that in other shows, you know, or like what other show would you have a 10-minute long montage of women giving birth, right?
Yeah, totally.
Which honestly I thought was a little long, but I appreciate the idea. Well,
try going into labor.
What was that, Sam? You said something?
I thought it was perfect. It was so emotional. I was sobbing like a baby. You know, the finale of Game of Thrones had a really brutal 10-minute scene of a woman being put through a really horrific ordeal that just went on and was super painful. And comparing that to this really long really rapturous, beautiful, joyous scene of parents giving birth and the pain, but also the joy and the like incredible power of, you know, life being created. And I just really think it speaks to the sort of radically different vision that this show is bringing, that, you know, it spent 10 minutes on a scene of wonder and happiness and power, rather than like horror and suffering. Both of those scenes could have been 90 seconds, the one in Game of Thrones and this one, but they both felt really determined to go to that place to get an emotional reaction out of the viewer.
Well, I think it's interesting that, I mean, speaking of going on for 10 minutes, that we've been talking about this show for quite a long time, this show about a telepathic group mind, and we haven't even really mentioned the telepathic part of the show.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that. I mean, I was really, really impressed by the way it handled the telepathy. It really felt, I felt like the show really made me feel like I was experiencing what it would feel like to be telepathic.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great, and I love the way the cluster sort of experiments with the different ways of connecting telepathically with the other people in the cluster, like, you know, where where they first sort of borrow each other's skills, like when Sun helps Capheus, you know, kick some ass when he's being attacked, and or when he's trying to get his mother's drugs back, and all that kind of stuff. Like all that stuff like is just really great and really well done. And actually, it's funny, like, I don't know if you guys had this thought, but, like, it occurred to me that there's a really good explanation of, like, how the telepathy works in that show, but it's not in the show, it's in Fight Club. You know, like, essentially, like, the way that all the telepathy works is kind of like almost exactly the way the Tyler Durden hallucination works in Fight Club, where it's like, you know, sometimes, you know, both personalities are sort of on the outside, like watching the one person, and they're sort of talking to each other. And then sometimes, like, you know, the person that's the local person is sort of just being sort of possessed essentially by one of the others, and allowing them to take over their body and that kind of thing. And so it's like I kept thinking about Fight Club and the way it's described there, and so I thought that was cool.
I also love those little moments of joy and discovery that they have. I particularly enjoyed like when the I forget who, but they called each other using the phone.
Yeah.
To verify that it was real. It was just one of those quick, you know, so many movies, so much TV does not like even accept the fact that cell phones exist, you know? And they ride around to avoid it. And it's like, yeah, of course the first thing you would do is figure out each other's number and have someone else call it, you know, to make sure that this wasn't a hallucination. You know, it's really enjoyable to see them thinking through the world building. I think that's one of the things, you know, we don't know, like, okay, yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing. Yeah, these people are all telepathic and connected to each other across the world. That's some crazy sauce right there. Like, how does that work? You know, as a science fiction, you know, you kind of hope that they don't explain it too much. But what's fascinating is I love it when you take that nugget, you say, what if, and then you just sort of expand out all these different ways. I mean, that's what really good science fiction and fantasy is. And that's exactly what they do. They kind of look at all the different ways that this can benefit, harm, and confuse them. And it's going to be the range of human emotions. There's going to be, you know, the joy of just calling each other up on the phone to make sure that this is like really happening, even though you can do it telepathically.
No, I totally agree with you, Toby, that the show was really, really good at showing, not telling, in a sense, right? That we just saw how the telepathy worked and they didn't try to explain it too much. I thought as the show went along, in some of the later episodes, they tried to explain it a little more than I would have liked.
Yeah.
And I think they would have been better off without some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like in particular, I mean, I thought this was total bullshit. I mean, for total bullshit, it wasn't bad bullshit, but the thing about like, oh, well, maybe all animals are telepathic and humans kill each other so without compunction because we lost we had a little mutation and we lost our telepathic gene or whatever. You know, like stuff like I kind of hate it when they get into stuff like that because I just don't believe it. But and I saw a review that pointed out that it was kind of funny that they had this line about, oh, the Sense8s are connected, so they don't have the same like wants and destruction that normal people do. Yeah. And then in the next scene, Capheus kills like 50 people.
Yeah.
with no apparent emotional distress.
The bazooka at
yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I felt like they gave answers to things that I didn't want answers to and didn't give me answers to things that I did want answers to. Like, were Jonas and Angelica part of the same cluster? Were they the only ones left from that cluster? Can any member of a cluster birth another cluster? So some of this is stuff that I imagine we'll get to later. I also really loved the sort of villain, the fact that
Mr. Whispers.
The fact that once he makes eye contact with you, he can get in your head forever. I thought that was a creepy, terrifying, and really fresh thing that I've never seen before. I also love the fact that after the first scene, we didn't see him till the 7th episode. Like, this wasn't about like the global menace. It was about the people's relationships.
Right, and I actually thought that, I had really mixed feelings about the sort of global conspiracy aspect, because I really loved the show. I was more interested in the how does telepathy affect these people's lives than I was in the, like, once it gets into kind of like more X-Men territory, like I kind of feel like I love X-Men, but we've already had X-Men. And it started feeling like I was like, oh, I just don't want this to turn into like a superhero show where they're fighting the evil conspiracy, shadowy government or agency.
Yeah, no, I agree. My by far my least favorite part of the show is the stuff that's that sort of conspiracy angle. And I mean, I sort of like, it's partially like from past experience. Like, I'm sort of like afraid, like shows like Lost, which had all this sort of shadowy stuff going on. And then like the X-Files and stuff, like, I'm just really gun shy about like embracing anything that like does things like that. And so like that was my least favorite parts of it. But I think all of the other elements that the show does well more than made up for that, and I'm willing to give them a little rope and see where it goes. I
do hope that they've put a lot of thought into what's happening in the next seasons. That they didn't just create just this one season and they haven't thought it out. I'm deadly afraid, like I said, of being really excited about this for season 1 and then showing up and having season 2 being, an utter train wreck, which is how I felt about The Matrix, right? Like, there's all this fantastic stuff that you've kind of come up with. Here are all these things, and we're going to explore them out, and then it just kind of goes down like a lead balloon in terms of the world building and positing. So, I'm hoping that the J. Michael Straczynski, who did 5 seasons of, or not 5, but all these different seasons of Babylon 5 that kind of kept unfolding, will be strong in this.
I think it might have been 5. I never actually watched that show, but I listened to some interviews with him, and I think he said it was 5. I could be wrong about that, but and people credit him with really kind of inventing that in modern television, the idea of a 5-season arc, or like a not just having an episodic story, but actually telling, conceiving the whole show as one big story.
I remember being amazed back in high school at that entire. It felt so new, like, for all the other faults of Babylon 5. Even back then, I wasn't impressed by the CGI for the. For the space battles, but even then, the sense of like a epicness was so novel to me.
Yeah, I mean, we had Daniel Abraham on the show one time, and he said this thing that I thought was just great, where he said that he was contrasting X-Files with Babylon 5, and he said X-Files had everything going for it in terms of good acting, good cinematography, good writing, all that kind of stuff, but they didn't know where it was going, and Babylon 5 had nothing going for it in terms of production values and stuff like that, but they knew where it was going. And in the end, Babylon 5 ended up as a success, and X-Files just kind of crashed and burned.
Well, I hope that means that with J. Michael Straczynski working on this show, that he does know where it's going, and that there is a plan, because they definitely have the production values on this one. And,
oh my gosh, do they?
Man, yeah. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen a television show that is at this level. Like, every episode feels like a movie, and like some of the action sequences, like, my God. Even the sequences where it's not like really crazy over the top action, but even just like the scene where Leto goes to rescue Daniela from that guy that I can't remember his name, but the bad dude that was trying to trap her into marriage or whatever, and he just goes to like fight the guy and rescue her. It's like, that was so cool. Like, I love watching, like, sort of starts off sort of telenovela style, like, and after we've already seen him like actually shooting all these different scenes and stuff. I thought that really worked well, but and then there's like the crazy or over the top ones with like all the stuff where Capheus is fighting the different gangsters, and there's the scene where he comes in and helps Nomi escape in that car, and they have that crazy car chase. And Will has that car chase with Jonas in like episode 2, and so there's like all these huge like action spectacles that all work really well and like look great, and better than most movies, really.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly that I did see J. Michael Straczynski say that he's plotted this out as a 5-season arc, and that
okay.
they know where it's going.
Oh,
that's
good.
amazing. That gives me a great deal of excitement for tuning into season 2.
Yeah.
But I want to say about the spectacle, though. I mean, I just could not believe my eyes watching the show. And I was like, how the hell did they film this? I mean, because it all looks like it was filmed on location.
Yeah,
which is really unusual for a TV show. Yeah, and so then I saw that they filmed every J. Michael Straczynski. I think he said they shot like every single shot was shot on location in 9 different cities. I mean,
and you can tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's just visually unbelievable.
It's the fact that it was so location based gives another level of complexity, considering that we constantly see characters in each other's scenes, right? So that suddenly Sun will be with Capheus. So, thinking about the extra complexity of filming those scenes when the actors had to move around so much, I'm not a person who can get his head around that. So it's extra impressive, the complexity of the scenes when you add that narrative sort of world building wrinkle to it.
Yeah, wow, you just kind of blew my mind. I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
Well, and J. Michael Straczynski, he said that they had plotted the whole thing out, right, on this big chart. And then they're like, oh, crap, we forgot about time zones, right? Because, Capheus is like, all right, we need Capheus to help Sun drive or whatever. Like, but they're in different time zones. He would be asleep. And so they had to, totally reshuffle everything to make sure that everyone would be awake at the same times as the characters.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow.
I'm impressed. Yeah, I'm doubly impressed now. Wow.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that it was really convenient to have Sun get thrown in prison because she just has all kinds of free time. She can she can pop in and help out somebody at a moment's notice, because what else does she have to do? I mean, she has to sew some stuff or whatever, but I mean, I guess she's just sitting around doing nothing most of the time. I mean, I don't know what they do in prison, especially in Korea, but I mean, maybe she has more stuff to do, but I mean, it's like, she's not going out in the town or anything, so should be available.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like we were all quite taken with this show, but it's gotten pretty mixed reviews. I mean, it's 69% on Rotten Tomatoes. And
really?
Here's a quote I found. It just says, critics seem unsure whether Sense8 is a masterpiece, a disaster, or both. Do you guys have any thoughts on why maybe we're connecting with this more than mainstream critics?
Art is flawed. It's not, I'm not making a case for it being perfect in any way. And the things that don't work about it are going to really stand out for some people, and the things that do work about it are going to resonate, and I think that that's a sign of the show being something that is faceted and spiky, right? I mean, it is not milquetoast, right? Like, there's nothing, like, the fact that people can't figure out whether it's genius or awesome or flawed or a disaster all at the same time speaks to the fact that it's an interesting experiment. I think maybe as a writer, for me, I find a glorious failed experiment that kind of tried to bat high way more interesting than something that just tries to bat low and succeeds. And so for me, in many ways, even if this all goes up in total smoke and flames out horribly, I'm still along for the ride because I'm interested. Like I said, I certainly have a lot of reservations about the sort of stereotypical racial stuff that's happening in it. I'm really scared about that, right? And so there's a part of me that has to go like, crap, this is another series where I have to set aside, the fact that I want really nuanced look at race or a really nuanced look at people living in other countries in order to enjoy it, right? I actually have to sit there and repress a little piece of myself that goes like, why is this character in Kenya smiling all the time and happy, even though things around him are pretty rough, because that is such a, that's such a glaring thing. Why is Sun always inscrutable? That is just another huge glaring thing. And so, that obviously is going to bounce people off. And so there are a lot of people that I wouldn't recommend it to, because I'm like, man, you're going to bounce off this hard, and rightfully so, right? I do think that they're doing better than, say, having white people play Asian characters like they did for Cloud Atlas. I think some of this is being mitigated. One of the things that I've always been impressed by the Wachowskis is, if you go look at them, one of the reasons I adore The Matrix and the sequels, even though they're flawed, is because they have just tons and tons of characters of color and actors of color just everywhere. And it's something you almost never see on screen. And so for all of the flaws, I'm getting this in Sense8 too, because they're going to these different parts of the world and just filming there. And so you're seeing just tons and tons of characters of color and of different countries. flip side is that because you've got so many non-traditional characters being up there in a big way, I think some people are going to bounce off of that and not even realize that that's what they're bouncing off of. All your traditional power fantasy entry points are not the main characters here. We have a white male cop in Chicago, and we've got a white male, criminal in Germany. But those two are probably the weakest characters out of the entire show. And so I think in some cases, probably some critics are going to just basically not see a way into it because they're not being fed up the dish that they want. And so you're going to have a lot of bias and subconscious actually reacting to say, like, this is really great, but I feel uncomfortable with it for some reason. So I'm going to find something to pick at. And it'll be interesting to see how this continues to go as people continue to process it. I think there's still a lot of processing going on.
Yeah, I feel like that those are all great points. And I feel like for me, the thing that made it so amazing and so special and so powerful is the thing that tons and tons of people are going to hate about it is that it's super, super queer. And I don't mean just the fact that there's like gay sex in it and queer characters. I felt like this was like a really, like, in terms of narrative, in terms of the dialogue, this is coming from a really queer place. It's this really radical idea of what family means, the ways that Nomi rejects her mother, right? That her mother wants to give her love on her mother's terms and is, complicit in her being forcibly institutionalized. And, you feel like if that was in a mainstream drama, there would be this push for her to sort of forgive her mother and accept her mother's love, even on terms that are offensive and problematic and deny her true identity. And the fact that this show doesn't do that, and the show, supports her in sort of making her own decisions about what her family is really radical. I mean, this is the most queer I've ever seen something mainstream, intended for mainstream consumption be. I mean, I've never seen in a mainstream piece of cinema or television a character talk about the transformative, transcendent spiritual power of giving somebody a blowjob. Like, as a gay man, like, that's like one of those like things that is an aspect of your experience that you don't see in mainstream narrative. And the fact that Leto says, I took him in my mouth like taking a Holy Communion, was mind-blowing to me. And I think there's a lot of stuff like that that's going to make people, like you were saying, feel uncomfortable, and I don't know why, so let me find a way to complain about this.
Yeah, I mean that stuff about family was extremely powerful, and that's something you're never seeing in sort of mainstream series television. The idea, that really strong rejection of traditional quote unquote family, which is almost always constantly reiterated and reinforced on mainstream TV. And as someone who has found a lot of sort of found family myself and had to make family, that is, I still have, I'm really close to family, but, I also have this huge, found family of my own. It's amazing to watch that sort of play out, because that is something that, I've never really seen portrayed positively. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, even the Wolfgang storyline, where he basically says, like, no, my father was a fucking asshole. Like, my father, like, I don't accept the bonds of family over the bonds of love when my father was an abusive asshole. Like, and you, my uncle who wants to kill me, I'm going to kill you because I'm not going to let this idea of family that's oppressive and problematic, like, guide my decision making. I'm going to choose the life I want.
And I found that extremely powerful. I mean, I'm not very close to my biological father, and that whole rejection of it is like, there's still a lot of pressure on me to sort of come to terms with and reach out to my biological father. Even when I explain the entire situation and what it was like growing up, people are like, well, it's still something where you should, for closure, come to terms with, loving, who your blood is. And it just has always blown my mind how strong that narrative is and how much it gets reinforced by everyone, that even if you've gone through a completely shit experience, people still expect you to love, find that forgiveness and love and redemption in someone who just happened to, be related to you sheerly through DNA. And, there are other ways in which I love my background, the fact that I'm a child of the Caribbean. I'm starting to meet some of my extended family. But as far as my biological father, there's like nothing there. And so watching something like that, to see that, on screen and usually when you see narratives like this, there's that rejection. And then the point of the circle is for them to come around by the end and find that resolution and to let go of that rejection, right? They always make people come back around. And in this, it's like, no, he doesn't. And that's so fantastic.
I did also want to mention there was a story on IO9 with the headline, Sense8 is the Philip K. Dick adaptation we always wanted. I thought that this was the Theodore Sturgeon adaptation we always wanted.
Yeah.
This really seemed like a Theodore Sturgeon thing to me for a couple of reasons. I mean, if people don't know, Theodore Sturgeon was always writing about love and empathy were his great themes. And he just wrote story after story about a group of individuals who kind of merge and form some sort of collective that's greater than the sum of its parts. He has a really well-known novel called More Than Human that deals with that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also very... he was one of the first writers to have gay characters in science fiction in his stories and portray them sympathetically. There's a story he wrote called The World Well Lost. And I actually just looked this up. I didn't know this, but on Wikipedia it says that when Sturgeon first submitted this story, that the editor rejected it, and then he called up all the other science fiction editors and urged them to reject it too.
Wow.
So,
Amazing.
that just
Was
gives...
it Campbell?
It didn't say, but I assume it was Campbell.
Fucking Campbell.
But yeah, to just give you an idea of what things used to be like in science fiction and just how far things have come, that you have a show like this now.
Mm-hmm. It occurs to me that you're correct that Sturgeon's a better choice than Philip K. Dick, but as far as generating clicks goes, probably saying Philip K. Dick, it makes more sense because people know who he is and most people don't know who Sturgeon is. So, I bet whoever wrote the post at IO9 probably in their heart knew Sturgeon was the better choice. But
I actually felt like this was the best Octavia Butler adaptation we're likely to see for a while, because it was pinging Mind of My Mind so hard for me, which is my favorite science fiction novel. This idea of people who are linked psychically, psionically, and who can only really survive by working together, and who have a bond that is way deeper and more meaningful, but or at least very, very different from what sort of the other ways in which they have relationships in the world. So that's something I've seen very rarely, except for Octavia Butler.
So it's very exciting that visual SF is, on TV and movies is finally caught up to the science fiction of the late 80s.
Yeah, truly must be morning in America.
Well, it's interesting, Sam, what you were saying about sort of bringing people together, because I heard J. Michael Straczynski in an interview. He said that actually the inception of this show was that he and the Wachowskis, they were just thinking about how the world is divided, that we're divided, by race and gender and everything, and we have by nation, and that they wanted to tell a story about people divided by all these things all coming together and have a show that brought people together. And I just want to get you guys' opinion on whether they succeeded in that. Is this a show that you think makes people look at other people differently and is going to foster a sort of global unified feeling toward our fellow human beings?
I think you're setting a pretty high bar there for any television show. I think it has so many great portrayals of people that I think that's what we always hope for in fiction, right? Is that we hope to understand people better through experiencing these narratives through these different points of view. And so, I can hope that something like this will help some people who maybe have misguided points of view about either, queer people or about other races and that kind of thing. But ultimately, I think that's a lot to ask of any piece of entertainment, but hopefully it can maybe, chip away at least a little bit at some of those kinds of biases that people have, even if they don't know that they have them. Because I think with characters as great as the ones they have on this show, I think it's something like this does have a shot at maybe changing some people's minds, even a little bit, just because it's because they're so well drawn and they feel so real that I mean, you almost have to be a monster to not to not like sort of empathize with these characters and what they're going through, and not be able to and to be able to not relate to what they're going through, like that emotional journey. So, I mean, if any show has the chance, maybe it's this one.
I sort of, what I'm hoping it'll do is that it's successfully enough to convince other filmmakers, other series TV to do more stuff like this. Character-driven science fiction, global perspective science fiction, non-standard other types of people science fiction. And, I'm looking at this and just sort of looking at it and hoping that it's a marker for more like this, whether, whatever it is, just I want this to succeed so that we can see more great stuff like this. And I think that what this is sort of like, a chance to maybe take the bar up a notch. And I hope that, it does do that and certainly, gets other shows to kind of take up their game a notch.
I do want to say, like, since we're potentially looking forward to 4 more seasons of this show, I did want to talk a little bit about that because, as I was saying, I'm afraid this is just going to turn into superheroes fighting a government conspiracy. And I thought I had way more problems with, I think, the last episode. I think I had more problems with the last episode than every other episode put together. Because you had this, to me, pretty implausible sequence where Will single-handedly infiltrates some sort of facility to rescue Riley. And it just seemed like whispers, why don't they just like lock the door of the room that she's in? And, I guess, did you guys feel the same way that the last episode, like it was cool and everything, but it just felt totally implausible?
To me, what was really interesting was that I felt like the emotional climax of this show was the 10th episode. That the sort of like show that's about characters and community and love and building together and chosen family has its climax in the incredible birthing / symphony sequence. And then episodes 11 and 12 are where we deal with all the action and the sort of plot, like the overarching plot about the conspiracy and the infiltration of the evil compound. So I agree. I felt like it was an interesting choice to sort of have a sort of emotional climax followed by a whole lot of action that didn't work for me so well. Although I still love the actual ending, like the last scene. I thought was really solid. But those episodes, sort of like episode 10, had me like a weeping, sobbing wreck, and I was like, I had to watch the last episode on the train, and I was afraid to do it because I thought I was going to like make a scene and make a horrible spectacle of myself, which I didn't, because the finale wasn't that. It wasn't going for that. Hitting that emotional punch.
Well, it's funny, Sam, because the climax of the first Matrix movie is my least favorite moment of the movie, where Trinity says, "Neo, you can't be dead because I love you," and she kisses him and brings him back to life. And I always assumed that the Wachowskis would have looked at that scene in retrospect and be like, "Oh man, what were we thinking?"
Yeah.
Because that's what everyone else's reaction to it has been that I've talked to. But then they did the same thing in episode 12. It's like, have you learned nothing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say it's it must be kind of a difficult challenge for any sort of filmmaker or whatever you call television producers, whatever, like people who are making these visual entertainments to have this kind of emotional through line on a show. But then, and so you want to have, like, I'm sure they wanted to have that sort of climax come in the final episode. But on the other hand, they also have to try to balance that with sort of the less sophisticated viewer who's going to be more interested in the, smashy, blowy up things, action sequences. And so I think it's probably the wiser choice, because it's like the people who are in it for the emotional content are more likely to stick around for the more action oriented episodes because we're already invested in the characters, whereas the people who are more interested in the big action spectacles are going to be harder to hold on to without constant action.
Do you think that's true though, John? I mean, like, do you think our reaction to this show is that much different from the average person? Do you think the average people were all like, "Oh yeah, I loved the episode 12. You got her out of that compound"? Because I feel like even even like just like the average person has probably seen that so many times. I just don't. I don't know. I wonder if our reaction is that much different from the average person, and if they really need to be doing that to keep the interest of the people who are going to connect with the show.
It was fascinating because, I mean, from a plot, I'm a plot junkie and I love action adventure, and I flat out, I mean, I think it would have been, if you were going to be really mercenary about it, you would have ended the season with her still in the hospital and that huge emotional experience, because who wouldn't have turned in next season to figure out how the hell they get her out of the hospital? So, you know, they ended with a natural ending, which is getting her out of the hospital. And sure, Whispers is chasing them, but I mean, the highest moment of tension is her being trapped in the hospital with Whispers. And that's a great place to end a season, for people to be forcibly tuning into the next one to go like, oh my gosh, what happens next? So I do think there was kind of this like, you know, almost Lord of the Rings, you know, 3 different endings kind of thing going on, you know, with the end of that first season, where it was like, you know, actually they didn't need to tie it up in such a neat bow. They may have lost some watchers because of that.
Well, you know, I suspect that might be partially J. Michael Straczynski's experience with television, and, you know, potentially having your show pulled out from under you without you being able to wrap it up. And so, I wonder if that was a factor, actually, because, I mean, I didn't think of it until you guys were just saying it, but yeah, you're totally right that would have been a sort of a more obvious place to end the season. But given that they probably didn't know what sort of future the show had at that point, when they were, you know, they didn't know if it was going to get picked up again. They wanted to give it a little bit more closure, you know, while still leaving it open to tell the other stories they wanted to tell, but to just in case that all they got was this one season, you know? Yeah,
they wrapped it up. That makes sense. They might in future seasons decide to end on you know, more natural cliffhangery notes. And of course it's easier for us to armchair quarterback the entire thing, because we don't have to do all the work.
We didn't have to go to 9 different cities.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that, I mean, this was like such a huge risk for everyone involved. I mean, and, you know, and how expensive it must have been to produce all these episodes, that they probably had, it's like they probably didn't really have very much security going into it, that it was like, oh, well, no, sure, we're going to get renewed. It's like, well, who knows? I mean, it's got to do so well in order to actually justify making more of it, because it had to have been so expensive. And by the way, I have to say, like, I got to give credit to the Wachowskis and J. Michael Straczynski for, like, being so hands-on throughout, like, the whole season. It wasn't just like a writer's room where, like, they came up with the general plot points and, like, they farmed out a bunch of the episodes. Like, they had their hands all over this thing. Like, I didn't notice if they wrote every single episode, but they certainly wrote a bunch of the episodes themselves.
They wrote I believe they wrote every episode. Like what they said was that each of them, like the Wachowskis wrote half, and then J. Michael Straczynski wrote half, and then they, like, rewrote each other's scripts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, that's the best way to do it, I think. But and then also, not only that, but the Wachowskis also directed a bunch of the episodes. So, you know, they were really, really hands-on on this, and I have to give them I got to have a lot of respect for that.
I think that's tremendous. And I think you see some of the most amazing, you know, you see some really amazing things happen, I think, when you've got that level of deep involvement.
Although on the directing, John, it's interesting because since they were in 9 different cities, the directors were assigned by city rather than by episode. And so, like, whoever gets credit for any individual episode is just kind of arbitrary. It's whoever, like, directed the most scenes from that episode.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Wow.
But this is, I don't know if I've watched any other Netflix original series, but do you guys have any sense of to what degree was just the, like, off the wall craziness of this show related to it being a like an online thing, and was it not subject to some of the same pressures that network shows or cable shows are?
Nothing that queer could ever have been produced by a network show, certainly, and even even HBO can't do that kind of stuff. I think that it's hard to imagine that outside of a venue like Netflix or Amazon or any of the other online content creators.
Well, that's really exciting to think about then, right? That in the future we might be getting a lot more stuff like this as these more online distribution platforms become more prominent.
And I think, too, the sort of complexity of the plot line is a lot easier to deal with. I mean, I think just nowadays with the TiVos and everything, like people, like producers are much more open to these complicated plot lines, whereas like, if you miss an episode, you might be completely lost. Whereas obviously on Netflix, they're not concerned about that whatsoever. So, they're able to make everything as complex as they want without having to worry about people being lost, because it's like, well, all the episodes are right there. Although, actually, given that, even though, like, we can just watch them all whenever we want, I do kind of wish they still had the previously on sort of thing at the start of each episode, just to remind us, like, of the key beats that maybe are going to be referenced in this whatever episode we're about to watch. I always kind of miss those when I'm streaming a show, because those are actually very useful. So, and this show is actually complicated enough that I feel like there are a lot of things that you might forget. As you're watching it, and like when I rewatched it for the second time, I did pick up on a lot of things that I sort of missed the first time around, and I thought it was interesting in retrospect, and actually just like and it's just a lot of the stuff. Rewatching it actually shows you how detailed they are with a lot of different elements, and like like Dave was saying, having Mr. Whispers appear in that first episode, and then we don't see him again until later, so much later in the show. It's like it was cool to see those scenes after I know everything that happens in the rest of the season. So.
Actually, speaking of Mr. Whispers, what do you think is going to happen with Will now that he has Mr. Whispers permanently in his head? Are they going to be able to do something to get Mr. Whispers out of his head? Like, presumably they can't just keep him drugged or, like, in the dark for the whole rest of the show.
Well, what was interesting for me rewatching the first episode after seeing the last episode was that I hadn't realized that Angelica was, like, drugging herself and trying to keep in a state of constant unconsciousness. And the reason she killed herself was because she had run out of drugs.
Yeah.
So, that's certainly the sort of way that she was going about it. I don't know the rules enough to know whether or not, like, you could just, like, could you just keep him in a room somewhere and, not tell him where he is?
Well, there's that one area of Iceland where they're not able to communicate with each other. So, I mean, I imagine at some point they might just stick him in isolation.
Wait, sorry, what was there's a region of Iceland where they have no telepathic powers?
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah, when Riley and Will are on the mountaintop, none of the other ones can reach them. But I wasn't sure if that was because of the emotional intensity of where they were, that they had shut themselves down or something, like that was a conscious decision, or if it was the physical location.
But there was, like, definitely some hint that that's not, that there is a way to get possibly him out of the loop there if they need to.
Well, you got to kill Whispers, basically.
That's eventually what's going to have to happen, of course.
Okay, cool. So, does anyone else have anything else about Sense8 that they wanted to cover that we haven't talked about?
I'd like to throw a shout out to whoever produced the music for the show. Like, the music is so well done. Like the original score stuff is, like, really well suited to all the, like, there's this recurring theme that plays throughout the show where when, like, it's like this really intense thing that happens when they're having an action sequence. Like, I love that. But then a lot of the other song choices were really great too. So, like, I thought it was great when they did the Four Non Blonde song or whatever. Is that the right name of the band? So when they did that and they were all sort of singing it, like, I thought that was really well done, and that was a good choice of song. Oh, right, and it's actually called What's Going On, right? And it was like, that was the episode where you're just like, what the fuck is going on in this show? You know what I mean? And the episode's even called that. So, but I mean, yeah, like, a lot of the different songs in the show I thought was just really well suited. I don't know if anybody knows the symphonic piece that they play during that birthing sequence, but, like, what did that have any, like, I don't know what the name of that is, or, like, does that have some sort of relevance to what was happening on the show as well? I kind of feel like it probably does.
It's Beethoven's Fifth Piano Concerto, the Emperor Concerto. It's his last, considered his greatest. I don't know enough about it to say whether, like, it has some resonance with the action.
Okay. Well, anyway, I mean, otherwise, though, I really was very pleased with the music in general.
Yeah, the original music was co-written by Tom Tykwer, who also wrote the music for Run Lola Run, which he directed, and Cloud Atlas, which I also thought had phenomenal music. So he's pretty solid.
Yeah, and I like that Four Non Blonde sequence. That's another thing that you don't see in a lot of, like, just a typical TV show. Although then I've had a really bad cold this whole past week, and I had that song stuck in my head for like 24 hours a day. So
now you know how Nomi feels.
All right. Any final comments?
Just if someone's listened to the whole thing and is still listening to us, like, hey, go check it out, right?
Yeah.
I expected at least one of us would have hated it. I'm kind of not disappointed, but it's we were all pretty taken with it, so that says something about it.
If someone's listened to this and they haven't actually watched it yet, we mentioned lots of spoilers, but I think this is the sort of show that it's very much still worthwhile watching, even if you have heard these spoilers and you've heard other spoilers. I don't know that it would really matter that much if I had spoilers for this show. I'm glad that I did go into it fresh without having anything ruined for me, but I think since the core of it, the real achievement of the show is that emotional portrayal of these characters. I think that you can't spoil that. So, definitely still check it out if anything that we've said intrigues you.
All right, great. So I think we're going to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with John Joseph Adams, Tobias Pickell, and Sam J. Miller. So guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. It was awesome.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to John Joseph Adams, Tobias Buckell, and Sam J. Miller for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including Killabill13 in the US and Jolly Bobs in the UK. Special thanks as well to Chris McKee, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon, and also to Michael Flynn, who just increased his pledge amount to $1.50 per episode. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd prefer to make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I'd like to thank Thomas Cam, who just became PayPal patron number 116. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.